Parshat Vayishlach. This shiur is dedicated to the memory of Rachelea Bas Reb Chaim Tzvi. I would like to discuss the promise Hashem gives Yaakov after the incidents with Dinah and Shechem, and after Yaakov goes to Beit El, goes to the place where God originally appeared to him, and builds a mizbeach, builds an altar like he had promised to Hashem. So let's turn to chapter 35, verse 9. Vayar Elokim el Yaakov od b'vo'o miPadan Aram. And God appears to Yaakov again when he comes from Padan Aram, Vayivarech oto, and he blesses him. Why do we say again? When was the first time God appeared to Yaakov? If you look at Rashi, verse 9, od, again. Pam sheni b'makom hazeh. This is the second time that God has appeared to Yaakov in this location. Echad b'lachto. The first time was when he left his parents. Ve'echad b'shuvo. And one now that he is returning to his parents, returning to the land of Israel. God appears to Yaakov in Beit El. How do I know that? If you would look at the preceding verses, we see that Yaakov has returned to Beit El and he builds a mizbeach there, he builds an altar. And he calls the place El Beit El. And now, God appears to Yaakov again in this place, one when he left, and now when he returns, and he blesses him. What is the content of this blessing? Verse 10. Vayomer lo Elokim, and God says to him, Shemcha Yaakov, your name is Jacob. Lo yikarei shemcha od Yaakov, your name will not be Yaakov anymore, your name will not be Jacob, exclusively. Ki Yisrael, but Israel, Yihiyeh Shemecha, will be your name. Vayikra et Shemo Yisrael. And he calls his name Israel. It appears that the first part of the blessing is a change in Yaakov's name, from Yaakov to Yisrael. Or alternatively, this is an introduction to what the actual blessing will be. Before God will bless Yaakov, he changes his name. Well, now with both explanations, it should be clear that Yaakov's name is not being changed in a way that his old name is forgotten. That happens with Abraham. When God changes Abraham's name from Avram to Abraham, we don't ever hear Abraham called Avram again. And in fact, in the Talmud in Brachot, it says that one is not allowed to call Abraham Avram. That name is no more. He has a new name. With Yaakov, he has a new name, Yisrael, but he still retains his old name, which is why here the commentators such as Rasag, Rav Sa'adigon, and others emphasize that when God says, and your name will not be called again Yaakov, they say the word od does not mean again, but it means exclusively. Your name will not exclusively be Yaakov, but rather it will also be Yisrael. And now I get to the rest of the blessing. Verse 11. Vayomer lo Elokim, and God said to him, Ani Kel Shakai, I am God. And God identifies himself with the name Kel, and then Shah, and then Dai. Perei urevei, be fruitful, multiply. Goy ukahal goyim niyeh mimeka, a nation, and a congregation of nations will come from you. Umelachim mechalatecha yitzeu, and kings will come out of your loins. V'eta'arta shenatati la'Avraham, u'liyitzchak l'cha etnena, and the land that I gave to Abraham, to Abraham, Yitzchak, and to Isaac, I will give to you. Uluzaracha acharecha, etena ta'aretz, and to your children after you, I will give this land, or the land. This is the blessing that that God gives Yaakov. So let's see what the actual components of the blessings are. In verse 11, God tells him, be fruitful and multiply. So either that's a command, which again is kind of preceding the blessing, or that's part of the blessing. God saying, you will be fruitful and multiply. You will have many children that come from you. And that seems to be the more correct explanation, because then God continues to say, a nation and a congregation of nations will come from you. Now we know Yaakov was only going to have one other child after this, Binyamin. And it appears, according to some of the commentators, and really from the Pshat, that Rachel is already pregnant at this point, because immediately after this we find out that she gives birth to Binyamin and she dies. So when God tells Yaakov, be fruitful multiply, you will have nations and a congregation of nations coming from you. He's referring to Yaakov's descendants, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. How many people, many individuals, nations will come from Yaakov. And this is a blessing. So the first part of the blessing we said is descendants, many descendants, nations. The next part of the blessing is that kings will come from Yaakov. And the third part of the blessing is that Yaakov will inherit the land of Israel and his descendants will inherit the land of Israel. So again, in short, Yaakov is given 3 blessings: children, land of Israel, and kings. Now when I read this blessing, it strongly reminds me of another blessing. Of the blessing that God gave Abraham when Abraham's name is changed at the Brit Milah. When God commands him to circumcise himself, and God changes his name from Avram to Abraham. If you look there, you will see almost the exact same words in the blessing God gives Abraham there, and the blessing God gives Yaakov here. So for today, I wanted us to look at the many blessings that occur in the book